So this morning I thought for the Dhamma talk this morning would focus on Laurence Khantipalo Mill's life, or Pra Khantipalo as he was known before he disrobed. How many people here actually met him or heard teachings from him? Did many people, if you put your hands up? There's a few here, that's very good. And the next question, how many people have read some of his books? Or lots. Same here, actually. Same here, because I actually met Laurence in 1984, so quite a long time ago, but it was in Western Australia and he'd just come for a retreat. And I didn't go on the retreat, so I didn't really get the opportunity to know him. And it's only in recent years that I visited him when he was in the aged care home over in, I think called Clarinda, that area, Clarinda. And I visited him in 2018 and also just shortly before he passed away, which was the Friday the 2nd of July. It was the day I visited him, and he passed away on the 5th of July at 2:45 in the morning. So my association is not great with Laurence through personal contact, but through the books, yes, because a few of his books are favourites of mine that I've got a lot of value out of, and it's helped my practice, and it's helped actually develop more faith. And I particularly think of the book. I think, do many people know Buddha, My Refuge? Buddha, My Refuge? Fantastic book. It's really lovely. It's got the qualities of the Buddha, which we just chanted, and it's got passages from the suttas that reinforce it, bring up that quality, sometimes from different angles. So it's a lovely book. But so I thought today to dedicate the talk to talking about Laurence, and also to link it with a very important concept in Buddhism, which is spiritual friendship or spiritual friend. And this is Kalyana Mitta. And that's something that obviously for many of Laurence's students, he was a Kalyana Mitta, a spiritual friend, a spiritual guide over the years. So I think this is quite an appropriate subject. And also, of course, with when anyone passes away, we're getting a teaching on impermanence. This is why a Buddha arises in the world. The Buddha said, if there were no birth or rebirth, you could call it, aging and death, a Buddha would not arise. And so this is a constant reminder of impermanence as well. So even though Laurence has passed away, he's teaching us now about impermanence for sure. And his teachings will continue too, because those books, many of them I know, are still in print. Because I spent many years in Sri Lanka, about 14 almost, and I had quite a lot of association with the Buddhist Publication Society in Kandy. And they still have his books, all his books that they publish are still in print, still available. It's wonderful, that they're still there. And also it points to the fact, doesn't it, that people find it useful and they find it meaningful and helpful with their practice. So I just thought to begin with, just to mention that too, that when Laurence passed away, I heard that he passed away peacefully and consciously, which is great. When I saw him 3 days before he died, he was very peaceful then too. And when I visited him, I did some chanting, and in between the chants I would talk to him and then continue with the next chant, hoping that he could be aware of it. We weren't sure whether he was conscious of it or not. He could be taking it in, and he did look very peaceful when I was doing the chanting and talking to him. Because at that point of death, we're really letting go in a big way, aren't we? In a very big way. So it's an opportunity for us and for the person who's passing away, actually, to take the practice further. And I was encouraging Laurence, because he knew Pali, and perhaps this Pali that he was hearing and the chanting would be very meaningful to him, and encouraging him towards not taking rebirth if possible. Of course, it really depends on one's development, what one sees, what one has seen in one's life. But death is a time when there can be a breakthrough, for sure, because we have to let go of everything, the body, all our attachments. So, as Indira mentioned, that Laurence was really one of the founders of Australian Buddhism, actually, one of the very important figures in Australian Buddhism. And so it's very fitting that we think about him today, we focus on his life today, because it brings up how do we pay respects to our Dhamma teachers, but also, to anybody that's passing away, really. It's very similar in some respects. Firstly, the most important thing, of course, when someone's passed away, we pay respects by remembering them and remembering their contribution to our lives or to the bigger picture. And Laurence definitely made a contribution to the bigger picture of Buddhism. Of course, that's not very big in Australia because it's not a Buddhist country. But so remembering a person is a very important aspect of it. And for a teacher, particularly remembering, and this is the same for the Buddha's teaching, remembering what they taught and also the example they gave of how to put that teaching into practice. Because this is the real value of teachers, is that you see the lived example. You can read the books and we can know the theory, but when you see it, a role model, it makes it very different for us. So it's an important thing to come in contact with a teacher that we really connect with. And we won't always connect with all the teachers, that's for sure. But some of them we will. And it's that connection that really makes a person what we call a spiritual friend or a spiritual guide, because they've actually taken us, they've allowed us, enabled us to go deeper into the Dhamma than we would have without that person. And it's very strange for me. You can hear teachings from a number of different teachers, no difference, it doesn't matter. And then you hear it from another teacher, wow, and it really hits home and it really goes deep. You could say that's repetition, but I think there's also a link for us, and we connect with different teachers. But of course, and I mentioned Laurence is still teaching us anyway through his books. So this is what Laurence provided, actually, is this sort of connection. And of course the Buddha mentions very specifically before he passed away into parinibbana, he mentions how we pay respects to the Buddha, to any spiritual teacher really. And that is, he says, not through, he didn't say candles, they weren't using candles at that time, it was more like oil lamps, not through oil lamps and incense and flowers, which were evidently very abundant as he was passing away. It was very obvious. But he said, we actually pay respect, we pay honour to the Buddha, to any teacher, by practicing what they taught, practicing the path of the Noble Eightfold Path. And in particular at that time, he was talking about the 4 focuses of mindfulness, satipatthana. He was mentioning that. So this is how we pay respects, and this is how we pay respects to Laurence too, really, is by putting into practice what we learnt from him. And this is the other aspect of how we honour, pay respects to our teachers, Dhamma teachers, our friends who have passed away as well, is through the thanks and the gratitude that we feel for what they have given us, their contribution, their import that's made a difference to our understanding of the world and ourselves. And that feeling of developing the path, developing good qualities, which will make our life much more pleasant, but also the life of others, and also we can take it with us. Because at the end of the day, we all know this, developing the body is a waste. Most people are doing that, aren't they? Because no matter how good, how strong, how beautiful it is, it'll eventually won't be. We can't take the body with us. And that's a teaching, really, that. What can we take with us? What will we take with us, we say in Buddhism, is usually the mind. It's moving on all the time, changing. It's not a static thing. But that's what we'll take with us. So this is where the real work happens. This is where, we can change the way we see the world. Because the worlds that we experience is very obvious to everybody. Where is it coming from? Inside. It's coming from the inside out. We know people who are feeling utterly depressed. What does the world look like? It looks dull. It looks grey. It looks maybe threatening. There's a lot of fearful qualities to it. So the experience we have of the world is coming from our minds and from our hearts. So this is the work of the Buddha's teaching. And this is the work that Laurence and all Dhamma teachers would be encouraging. So now I thought to show some slides. Actually, I wonder if just so people who haven't, isn't that nice? That's lovely. And can I change them this way? Oh, all right. So that'd be easy then, won't it? So isn't that a nice picture of Laurence? This is in his last days, last year, sorry, not last days. In 2017, I think we thought. It's very hard to say. There's no dates on the photos and so on. But it's a lovely photo because it's very engaging, and you see Laurence looking at us with the look of a teacher who's looking through us sometimes, I should imagine, actually. And you see that his life was a long life, really, 88 years, nearly 89. It would have been 89 this year if he'd made it to November. So that's a lovely picture. And this, I think, was at one of the birthday parties. This is where most of the pictures were taken. And so this is it's a real lesson in impermanence. You see Laurence, I think this is from Thailand, actually. He looks so young, and he was always very skinny, I think, but he looks so young. Because Laurence, first of all, he met Buddhism through books. When he was called up for the English army, I believe, and he read these books on Buddhism, and obviously it went straight to the heart, maybe a past life, and he wanted to ordain. And so in 1961, he ordained. I think in England at that time, and then he went to India. Gary will probably know more of this. And in India, he probably took his higher ordination and was there in India for some time. After India, a few years there, he went to Thailand, and in 1966 he took another reordained, we call it in the Thai tradition. And this is what he looked like, I think, at that stage. Maybe even the 60s. Could be. Looks very young, doesn't it? Baby-faced. And so that's the period of Laurence being in. He was Khantipalo, being in Thailand, having ordained, and he was writing some of his things even then, I think, and had visited. I don't know when he visited Sri Lanka. But he did visit Sri Lanka, the Buddhist Publication Society in Kandy as well. But in 1973, he came to Australia, and he was invited to help establish a centre in Sydney. But it looks like instead of establishing that centre, he established Wat Buddha Dhamma, which, if you know anything about Wat Buddha Dhamma, is about 3 hours from Sydney, and it's in quite a remote area in a national park. And of course, he co-founded it with Ayakema, whom he had met when he came to Australia. And I've seen photos of them in 1973 when he did a retreat at Elsa Liebman's property in, I think, northern New South Wales. And he conducted a retreat there. And it's very nice. You can see some of the people from here even in the retreat. I don't know if people know Liz Cook. She was in that photo. She was there. But they started together Wat Buddha Dhamma, and were teaching together as well. And this is the hall that Khantipalo was instrumental in designing, I suspect, and also helping with the landscaping around it. And it is one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. It's just absolutely... when I went to visit, I thought, wow, this is World Heritage listing quality. It's just so perfect. And what a relief that it didn't burn down in 2019, wasn't it? 2019, the end of 2019, when Wat Buddha Dhamma burnt. But they water bombed all around the meditation hall. They saved it, and they did lose Ayakima's kuti, which was lovely too. It was built on a rock, and another hut as well. So it's a beautiful building, and you can see the lines. So this is... What year was that, Gary? The building of this new sala, the meditation hall? 80s, wasn't it? I think 80s. Inside, isn't that beautiful? That's just fantastic. It's really, when you go there, it's even nicer to be there, actually. Beautiful. And you've got this little chaitya stupa at the top, very beautiful. And this is the garden that he designed outside it, the Zen garden. It's a landscape sort of around it, but this is the main feature with this unusual modern stupa at the end of it, like a river course, you'd say, a dry riverbed. So beautiful. Because Khantipalo, as Laurence Mills, he trained as a horticulturalist. So his interest is in plants and trees and things like that. And he had that, obviously, a very artistic quality too. As a lot of his work, particularly the translations of poetry, very, very poetic and artistic. And there we are. There's Ayakima and Khantipalo as he was in the mid-80s. So really he was the one that encouraged Ayakima to practice the path and eventually ordain in the late 70s, I think Ayya ordained. And this is another photo of him at Wat Buddha Dhamma, looking quite young. A little bit older, but quite young still, always thin. And this is very nice. Thank you very much, Helen, for the poster. I don't know if you can't see the details, but it's a meditation retreat. Guess where? Here at the BSV. I thought it said 1980, but it says April 1990. And the thing that struck me about it, if you can read the text, it gives a little blurb about Khantipalo, and then he's doing the retreat details, public talks, and so on. It reminded me of Ajahn Brahm. I thought the names have changed, but the same format. It reminds me of impermanence, change, and that all of us, myself included, one day they'll say, "Who was that person?" Ajahn Nissarano, Oh, he gave a retreat. Like we're saying about Khantipalo. And that's the nature of Dhamma, in a way, that we reflect on the impersonal nature of our lives. So and the contribution that he made too, wonderful there. That's great. And this was, of course, at the old Buddhist Centre in Mary Street in Richmond, you can see. A lovely photo from the newspaper. And it says, if you can read it, a growing kind of peacefulness. Looks lovely, doesn't it? And I think there was a hut in the back of Mary Street where he used to stay, and Ayakima stayed there too, actually. And that's a very nice photo if you can see the cat. Can you see the cat? It's rather lovely. Nice. That was at Richmond again in the 80s. And then after the 80s, in 92, Laurence disrobed, and this is a photo from after 1992. And this is actually a period that I forgot. I met him here in Melbourne in about 93 or 94, looking like this. And I was very interested to meet him because I knew he'd disrobed. And I thought, I wonder why he disrobed. I thought, well, I'll go to the talk and maybe I'll understand. I had heard some reasons for it. But when I went to the talk at Kagyu Ivam Centre in North Carlton, the talk he gave was on the 6 elements. And it was just like Theravada. Dhamma. It was really very much what he knew and what he'd understood, actually. It was a lovely talk. But he looked very much like this, jeans and the hair and everything. I thought, wow. But I came away not knowing why he disrobed, any more information about it. But I think the reason for that disrobal was twofold, that he'd met a very important spiritual friend. And this was this Tibetan lay teacher, Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, who is a Tibetan, who was a Tibetan layperson who lived in Italy. He was actually an academic. And he had met him. Some of the people that were living at the Wat Buddha Dhamma at the time had experienced such great benefit from retreats with this Rinpoche that Laurence became interested, and the connection very strong. And so that was part of the reason, I gather, for his disrobal. I think Gary's described as the heart guru. But it is that sense of connection. It can be very strong. And that's the spiritual friend or spiritual guide can take us further on the path. So that was in 1992 that Laurence disrobed. And then this is the next phase of his life, which started in, it says 2012, because his health was failing. And Gary was one of the, as Indira mentioned, there were quite a few past students who were giving support and care, which is wonderful. It's a sign of, definitely a sign of gratitude for a teacher when the students remember the teacher and give that practical support. And of course the body and the mind, or the body and the brain really, not the mind, age. And so as Laurence was aging, he needed more and more care, and he went into this Clarinda aged care home. And this is where I met him, actually, at Clarinda. And he was not speaking at that stage, but he was had this lovely quality of, we say, equanimity, peacefulness, contentment. But you can see from this photo, I think this is at Clarinda, I think it is. Very at peace, which is wonderful to see. Because you would expect, if you cultivate, whatever you cultivate in your life, it will become the quality, the habit, that the tendency for us to experience those states. So if you've developed lots of positive qualities, that's what will be there as we age. And this is, I like this photo because it's a group photo. It's not such a good one of Laurence, but it's a nice photo of, you can see Gary, you can see Michael, you see Helen and Gary there. And there's Jane on the right, is that correct? Yeah, Jane. And I don't know the other people so well, but former students as well. So that's lovely. And that was his 84th birthday in, I don't know, 84th would have been 2017 or 16, was it? 18. Right. Yeah. And then I thought to have a photo of Venerable Chi Kuang. She was also somebody who supported him. She knew Laurence, or he was Khantipalo, when the Wat Buddha Dhamma was founded. She was one of the founding people, in fact, Venerable Chi Kuang Sunim. And it's quite interesting that another person who some of you may know, Venerable Ajahn Dhammo. Some people know of Ajahn Dhammo, Australian monk from Adelaide who lives in Thailand. Ayakima used to call him the blonde Thai, and just referred to him. And he also was at Wat Buddha Dhamma. So when Laurence was in the aged care home, he came and visited, actually. And also, you know who else came to visit him? Ajahn Sumedho from England. He was staying in Warburton, the monastery in Warburton, and he came to visit. And it just shows the regard for him. And of course, Ajahn Sumedho knew him probably when he was in Thailand. living in Thailand, and they would have, I think in fact he might have even translated for Ajahn Sumedho or something in the early days or something like that. They had a connection anyway. So that's Venerable Chi Kwang. People will know her. She gives the teaching usually at the end of each month here. And who is that? Isn't that lovely? That's nice. And with a bow tie, it's very, very special. So it looks great. So I think that's the last one, actually, I think. So it gives you, a snapshot of Laurence's life. Probably there's a lot of detail that one could mention that I haven't. But one thing I should, it's in the information too that I think Helen provided for the email, the weekly email, that he encouraged the ordination of women. And that's pretty obvious because he encouraged Ayakema to ordain. But it says here that as early as 1984 he ordained 3 nuns at Wat Buddha Dhamma. So amazing. And I'd encourage people too who don't know his books to have a look at those books, because there is the ones I mentioned, actually, Buddha My Refuge. One of my favourites too is The Splendour of Enlightenment. The Splendour of Enlightenment. It's a beautiful 2 volumes collection of passages from the Buddha's teachings. So, I didn't mention too that Laurence had ordained later in his life, just before he went into at the aged care home, he ordained at Quang Minh Temple in Brayburg, which is where the funeral will be tomorrow. So it's very appropriate in a sense that the funeral is there. And obviously Venerable Phok Tan, the chief monk there, he knows Laurence from that occasion, but also from Sydney, I heard, when he heard Laurence as Pra Khantipalo give some teachings in Sydney. So I'd like to now just to give you, that sort of gives some feeling for Laurence, but I thought it would be nice to invite Gary, who knew Laurence from 1984, to give a little, 5 or 10 minute picture or vignette of Laurence, of his character and why so many students were attracted to him. That's part of character, isn't it, usually? So, Gary, would you like to come over so you can be in the camera? And there, it's almost time. Wow, that went fast. I was going to talk a lot more, actually, but... Is it easy? In the picture? Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, thanks, Bhante. And on the topic of Kalyana Metta, or spiritual friend, Laurence actually wrote a biography of a couple of years of his life, because he had such a big life that he'd probably need about 10 volumes. Yeah. But in any case, I met, as you mentioned, in 1984 at the Buddhist summer school in Melbourne University, which I think quite a few people here may have been. He did change my life for the better from the moment that I started to attend his teachings, and in particular his meditation instruction. On first meeting, he was quite an imposing figure. Is this volume okay? He was 6'2" tall and totally bald, of course, and some people may have felt intimidated, but a lot of people felt his kind-heartedness and his loving kindness. He taught meditation. You could feel less in his instruction. For example, sometimes he would move around the room just to gently adjust people's posture if they had a bent back and were unaware of it. And, sometimes he'd just touch you in the small of the back if you weren't quite straight. And that's, of course, very helpful. And it comes from the good heart. And also had a great sense of humour. This saw him through most things, even into the nursing home. And speaking of the nursing home, I was quite touched to hear that several staff were saying, this is my favourite patient, and they were in tears when he passed and was very ill. And I think his sense of equanimity and the fact that he was bearing up and bearing witness to what he was undergoing was self-evident, and the lovely smile that he showed, even though he'd been wheelchair-bound for quite a few years. So he guided the meditation from the good heart, as I was saying, and even if someone's got that, they can admonish others, and other people don't take that to heart because it's coming from such a good place. But he could be quite fierce, and I think some people got turned off when he manifested that sort of thing. But if we look at his wisdom and compassion, and certainly if you look at the parameters, he had many of them, or all of them, but some stand out with the wisdom and compassion. But his determination he was a very determined person, and of course you wouldn't wander the jungles of Thailand in caves with all the snakes, scorpions, centipedes, rats and everything unless you had that determination to see it out, and that was part of his life. As we all know, Laurence, being such a strong, determined individual, created some controversy in Dharma circles at times, but he has that in common with our spiritual director here, Ajahn Brahm, as we all know also. Also, Ajahn Brahm has a few extra things in common aside from what Bhante was saying, because both practitioners and monks kept their equanimity amidst the 8 worldly winds, and I think most people know that Laurence know the 8 worldly winds that Laurence often referred to in his Dharma desanas, and the 2 in particular I'm thinking of are praise and blame. Of course, any public figure like Ajahn Brahm or Laurence gets a fair bit of that, but the tribute to both of them, of course, is that they kept their equanimity despite it all. And Laurence certainly walked the talk, so he was very inspiring. And he was like the battle elephant that allows arrows to reflect off its hard hide. He was a sensitive person, no doubt, but that means also he had the strength of his Dharma practice to support him when he knew what he was doing was right, just like Ajahn Brahm, in a similar way, as we all know. And when he was wheelchair-bound, for those years I mentioned, he had a favourite word as he lost his speech, and this word manifested at times when we were doing chanting, or when some deep, sacred or spiritual moment arose. He would just say shine, and he would smile, and he'd obviously, every time he said that, had a lot of joy, and it's almost like the inner bright light of sacredness that we all share was being exemplified by that when he did. It would indeed be a poor show that if, out of lack of common decency, a teacher of loving kindness were to be wrung out like a dirty used dishcloth at the use-by date and cast in a bin. But fortunately, this did not happen, and Laurence had the support of a joint effort right to the end of the Sangha, the lay people, and also, not forgetting, the care attendant staff and nurses at Embracia and Clorinda. And just speaking of that, Cece is one of our people who attends this temple, and she was very, of course, helpful because as a nurse at Clorinda, she could facilitate many things. And once again, that sort of landed in Laurence's lap. And similarly, when we first chose one of 2 rooms that were offered at Clorinda, they said you can have this room and that, and normally a room is totally devoid of the previous occupant's possessions, but lo and behold, one of the 2 rooms had an authentic temple painting from the Mahayana tradition, I suppose, with an authentic stamp on, and it was of 3 bodhisattvas. So needless to say, we knew which room Laurence should have. It's almost like I was waiting for him. So he led some retreats specifically on the topic of loving kindness for the whole retreat. His lifestyle, like all renunciant Sangha, was austere, as we know, living, as I mentioned, in Thailand and later on at Wat Buddha in the bush, which he loved. And his qualities of aditana and upekkha inspired others on the retreats he led. When he sat with us during retreats, if it was a 10-day retreat, he would sit mostly all the sessions, aside from interviews. So he really walked the talk, which was inspiring. However, unlike most of the participants, once we went back to the comfort of our central heating after 10 days, he just went 24/7, segued into his solid formal practice in his kuti. And I noticed we'd sit around having a bit of a sampapalapa straight after a retreat, and Laurence would be there, to be people person. He'd be there maybe 20 minutes or something after the retreat, and then you'd suddenly look around and he'd gone back to meditate, presumably into his practice, while others stayed all afternoon, sort of debriefing or whatever they... So that was also, even when people were offered lollies in the evening, in a circle of meditation, and the lollies would go around once, he'd take one, and the second time around people were getting a little bit, this is really yummy, and he'd just say, oh, one's enough. So he was very renunciant in his attitude. Yeah. Not sure how many minutes that is so far.
Yeah, that's about 8 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just finish off by saying that a well-known bhikkhu here, Arya Sila, has said in his Dharma talk, it's not what happens to us, but our attitude to what happens. And, Laurence had a life that was well lived because all through right to the end, including the period when he had to be wheelchair-bound, he showed that he could work with the conditions. In fact, when he was at my place, I said once, whatever it was, whether we couldn't get a bus or something, I said, we'll just have to work with circumstance, Laurence. And he said, oh, well, what else could you work with? And that was after his diagnosis of vascular dementia. So he clearly had a lot of clarity despite that progression. Laurence gave his students in far north Queensland Pali Dharma names, just so that when they took refuge they would have something to remind them. And so, aware of this, I wasn't in Queensland, but I contacted him, and he kindly offered me the name Sadawanta. But of course, we know Laurence's master, Professor Chogyal Namkai Norbu Rinpoche, his heart guru, he said, some students come to me and they say, I'm not George anymore, I'm Dorje. And he said, but really, if they don't change their habits, it's still George. So we have to be aware of that sort of trap that people can fall into. In conclusion, I'd like to say that anyone here who wishes to attend the funeral ceremony at the Kuan Min Temple...
I was going to do an ad for that in a minute.
Oh, okay. Well, if you want to do that, I'll leave that to you. You're all welcome. There's plenty of space. It'll be a wonderful opportunity to show some final respect. So I'll pass over to...
Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you for that. That really fills in quite a bit and gives us a bigger picture. I must admit, the first time I met Pra Khantipalo in 1984, I found him rather imposing. Somebody just asked him something that was a bit silly, and he replied he was quite sharp at his reply. And I thought, he doesn't suffer fools. That's what I thought at the time. I thought, So I kept away. So this is very good that we reflect on, the life of someone like Laurence, and the spiritual friendship that he offered to so many, and the spiritual friendship that drove him to change from one tradition to another. And I didn't mention that after he met the Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, he actually started a centre in Cairns in Queensland called the Bodhicitta Centre, and also got married at that stage as well. So he was obviously teaching in sort of a number of different traditions, not just the Tibetan tradition or the Dzogchen tradition, but also in Theravada and so on. So I'd like to finish off, because we can just to mention too that this spiritual friendship is actually so important that the Buddha said to Venerable Ananda, when his attendant, Venerable Ananda, said, "It's half the holy life, Venerable Sir, this spiritual friendship." And the Buddha said, "No, it's not half. It's all. It's 100%. It's everything." So it's so important. And people sometimes wonder why that is. Because the spiritual friend, as I said, opens up things for us, can give us that connection to a deeper level of understanding the Dhamma, of understanding reality. And also, you find that these teachers, their students, become like their teachers. They take on a lot of their qualities. And I can certainly see that with Ajahn Brahm being my teacher. I have taken on a lot of the qualities and a lot of the views and the directions in Dhamma that he has. So this spiritual friendship is very, very important. We are conditioned. This body and mind is a conditioned phenomena. People think we sort of influence how the body and the mind is. Fashion drives a lot of how the body looks. And the mind is driven by so many influences from our parents, from school, from our friends, from the internet. All these things are shaping our minds, for better or for worse, actually, sometimes. We have to, as it were, focus towards the better, if possible. And so I'd like to finish off, because now is 10:30, and just to dedicate the merit of today's talk, and then open up for questions. But beforehand, I was just going to do the ad about the funeral tomorrow, which I hope to attend. I'm going for a procedure first, but I will be there, I hope, at 12:45. The funeral is going to be at the Kwan Min Temple in Braybrook, in the west side of Melbourne. And this, of course, is Venerable Phok Tan's temple. It's a very impressive temple. I've never been there, actually. And the funeral, if you Google it, as we do, you can see Kwan Min Temple, Q-U-A-N-G, and then Min, M-I-N-H. So it'll be tomorrow. It'll be there's going to be a dana offering to the monks and nuns at 11, but at 12:45, 1:45, it'll start. And I read this in the email, the weekly email. It says, Laurence indicated his preference that attendees not dress in sombre hued clothing at funerals. Because I know, isn't there the tendency, everybody wears black. I have seen that, and he said, please don't. So there are more details on the Facebook page, Laurence Mills' Facebook page. I don't think did he ever see it, the Facebook page? I don't know. Yes, that's a good point. And this funeral will be live streamed, and you'll hear a lot more detail from Helen's going to speak, and I think Michael, you're going to speak too.
Just briefly in regard to the live stream, I just got the link this morning. Kwame usually streams on Zoom, but they've set up a YouTube link, so we'll put that up on the Facebook page, but also see if I can mail it out through BSC.
Thank you for that, Michael. And we'll just conclude before the dedication of merit. It's a very important part of any memorial ceremony or memorial occasion is to ask forgiveness, because this is a very important part of... Monks do it all the time, actually. Whenever we part from each other for a lengthy period in the Thai tradition, we ask forgiveness for whatever we have done, said, or where they usually say even thought, but how would they know? And to ask forgiveness for that, and then to give forgiveness. And this is a very important way of finishing that unfinished business, as much as possible, letting go of any hurt that we have accumulated, as we will, through our lives, realising it's of no benefit to us, certainly no benefit to the other person as well. This is part of looking after our minds, and it's mental hygiene, really. So I would, first part of this is, of course, asking forgiveness. And as I say, I'll speak the words so we can. Those who wish to keep it in mind, you can even close your eyes. Please forgive me for anything I did or said or failed to do or say that hurt you or upset you, whether I did them intentionally or unintentionally. So that's asking forgiveness from Laurence for those who knew him, and then giving forgiveness. This is very important. I forgive you for anything you did or said or failed to do or say that hurt me or upset me, whether you did them intentionally or unintentionally. Sadhu, sadhu, that's very good. So we wish Laurence that may you finish with being reborn and going through life after life. But if you are reborn, Laurence, may you have a good and happy rebirth. May you encounter the Dhamma and take the refuge in the triple gem. And so, sadhu, Laurence, sadhu, Khantipalo too. All right, now just do the verses of dedication of merit, and those that wish to, you're welcome to join in. We just do those quickly because we're 5 minutes late. Etavata cha amhehi sambatang punya sampadang Sambe deva anumodantu samba sampatti siddhya etavata cha amhehi sambatang punya sampadang Sambe Buddha anumodantu samba sampatti siddhya etavata cha amhehi sambatang punya sampadang Sambe satta anumodantu samba sampatti siddhya idang me nyati nang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo idang me nyati nang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo idang me nyati nang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. May you abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may you maintain well-being in yourself. Sadhu, 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 sadhu. So thank you for that and for the, bearing with that. We were a little bit late, but I think we started a bit late. So if there are any comments or questions, you have Helen, I can see, probably got a comment to make. Lovely. Because when we have these, like when Gary gave us some information, gave his experience, it gives us more of a 3D picture of the person, really. It brings them alive. When we remember a person, it brings them alive, and especially these sorts of personal things, encounters, vignettes, stories. Thank you, Helen. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to pay enormous respect to all the care and compassion that Gary and Michael gave to Laurence over the last 10, 15 years. It really was remarkable to see this, the they were going to the home to be with Laurence, to sit with him, to help him with his meals, to talk to him, many days in the week. And it was lovely to see such love.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's many anecdotes I could tell about the early days with Laurence, but perhaps keep those for tomorrow. But I just wanted to say that Gary and Michael have done a fantastic job, and I think Michael is the legal guardian, so there's a lot of work.
Yes, no, that's wonderful. And that's actually, when you say loving kindness, but it's also compassion in action, isn't it? Compassion I often think of as taking care of ourselves and others as well. So that's a wonderful thing, and it's a measure of a teacher, isn't it? That after all those years, and many years of being in a very frail condition, that the students some of the students are still looking after them with such love and care. It's wonderful to see. I was even more amazed because some of the people who visited Laurence regularly, Gary told me this, they didn't even know Laurence from before. They weren't students, but they come once. There were one or two people come once a week, to be with Laurence, and yet they don't know him at all. And maybe it is because they feel that energy and that also gratitude for someone who's given a big contribution to Buddhism, not only in Australia, because I know somebody said to me, people overseas are watching this, they won't know who Laurence Mills is. Laurence Khantipalo Mills is. I said, no, because of the books, he's reached many people all over the world, actually. So it's fitting that we, pay this tribute, we pay this respect to Laurence Khantipalo Mills. So thank you for that, Helen, and we look forward to more stories. This is the best part with memorials, actually, not all the details and the facts and so on. It's the stories that are much more interesting, and I enjoy. So lovely. So tomorrow there'll be opportunities for that. And if you can't come, please watch the live streaming if you're interested. Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions online? Somebody saying, who is Laurence Khantipalo Mills? There is one. Thanks very much, Srinju. Thank you very much for organising with the slides. The slides were done by, photos were done by Ayya Santa, one of the nuns in Newbury Buddhist Monastery. She's very good with this sort of thing. It was late yesterday afternoon, so she was really great.
Ajahn, there's just one question. It's a very interesting one. Does a spiritual friend have to be a human? Can it be a pet, like a cat or a tree?
Wow, that's I'd never thought of that, actually. Yes, it's quite an interesting question. I think, well, of course, the way a spiritual friend is a spiritual friend because of the way we regard them, of the effect that it has on our mind, isn't it? Because other people would have met Laurence Mills, for instance, or Khantipalo, and may have been, put off. But you weren't. And there was this connection. And a lot of the connections actually coming from our side. We are actually in sync with them. So I think it is quite possible that, because you see animals and maybe animals that this person thinking of pets, and some of them got very good qualities. They're very patient, or dogs, for instance, incredibly loyal. And some of these qualities can affect our mind and bring us and evoke those qualities in ourselves. Because that's what the spiritual friend does. It's not as if we don't have those qualities, it's just that it brings it up stronger for us, actually. And when we see somebody, or a pet or an animal, that's got qualities, somehow we respond to that and it brings up similar qualities in us. So you could say that they are like, I don't know if they're really Kalyana Mittas, but they're really certainly helping us go deeper in understanding reality, understanding Dhamma. Yeah, so perhaps it's possible. Yeah, perhaps it's possible. Yes, I mean Garfield has really transformed many people's lives. I don't know for the better, but at least they'll be happier or more humour. So that's an interesting one. Never heard of that idea before. Usually it is a human being, actually. So let's. So we can finish off, for those who would like to, paying respects to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. You're welcome to. We can do the Arahang, maybe that's good for online. Oh. That's good. And now there is a shared meal for those that have got the time. Please come over for the shared meal next door. Thank you.